This is the Weigh-In Podcast by Benoit Chestnut and normally Sebastian Romero, but he will return at some point. Woohoo. So on this week's Weigh-In, we're going to break down that final X. The final X that was absolutely thrilling. We will go over that thrilling final X and any other topics that roll around in discussion. But man, if you didn't see Final X, I would say before I spoil it for you, stop the video, go watch that Final X, then come back and return to this vid. But first, we're going to break down that Final X. So that is this week's weigh-in. So if we jump right in, first of all, PJ Duke got the job done. Got the job done. So nobody ever really expected that to happen. So let's first dial that. BJ Duke got the job done. And that is absolutely crazy. So that was the start, and as we get to it, I saw this on Insta. This is the first year without David Taylor, Jordan Burroughs, or Kyle Dake on a world/Olympic team. That is huge. So if we go right over, Zahid Valencia did the unthinkable, beat Dake. PJ Duke stunned Diaco Mahalis. Henderson makes the team, but whew, I think that, and that's one thing, we had already started talking about here on the pod is that that belief that one has the power to beat another. So you go into that match and because PJ Duke went in there and said, I'm going to win this. And then not only did he just win it by points, he pinned him. So, like, when you talk about something of that high of a magnitude, you talk about something that's very well, like, huge, that, you have something like that happening. And, all in all, in terms of just Final X, I think this was the best, not the best, but I think it's up there in the top 5 best Final X's. It's got to be. You got Kyle Dake that went down. You got Yakima House that went down. You had a wild match with Wyatt Henderson that was high scoring affair, which I believe, yeah, 20-14. That's come on, that's immaculable on that one. That's thrilling. You got David Carr on there. You got Levi Haynes. Like we got a stacked lineup on this Team USA. We got a stacked lineup. It just no other way to do it. You just can't. You just can't see it any other way. That it comes that good. That you get something so well like that. So it's just really great thing to see that USA Wrestling, that team lining up. That's just two really good groups. This and this is one thing in terms of Zahid. Did David Taylor play a role in that taking down a Kyle Dake? I'm not going to answer that right now. I'm going to give you some time to think about what I just said, and then I will answer it. I will answer it. But nonetheless, like, okay, so you look at this Final X, you know, and it didn't disappoint. It really did not disappoint in terms of anything. There was no disappointing factor from from Final X. I thought it was a great event. Like, even if we talk about this woman's side, you got Audrey Jimmy's at 50 kilo. You got Felicity Taylor at 53 kilo. You got Cristel Rodriguez at 55 kilo. You got Helen Maroulis at 57 kilo. Helen Maroulis has been on. This is her 15th world team, which is wild. You got at 59 kilo. You got Gerard Winchester. Again, gonna apologize for the butchering of some of these names. Um, at 62 kilo, you got Adako. At 65 kilogram, you got Macy Kilty. At 68 kilogram, you got Kennedy Blades. At 72 kilogram, you got Alexandra Glide. Glide. And at 67 kilogram, you got Kylie Walker. So we talk about that women's team is stacked when it comes to Team USA. And I say that because if you look at let's just talk about, if you look at from 50 kilogram to 76 kilogram, the shrines that we look at. Like, okay, let me just tell you, if we just took Kilty, Macy Kilty, Kylie Walker, and Helen Maroulis, the shrines that come out of that, the sheer fold of like events that those two wrestlers have won is absolutely impeccable. So when you talk about that women's team, we know the women's team is stacked. We know that for sure, and that's something we know that women's team is stacked. And then even then, the men's team still stacked. We got a stacked men's team. So it's just absolutely crazy that happened. So we got you know we got Tahid Valencia on the team. We got Kyle Snyder. We got Real Woods, Spencer Lee. Uh, you got Wyatt Hendrickson, David Carr, Levi Haynes, Carter Starachi. No, scratch that. I didn't mean to say Carter Starachi. My bad on the naming Starachi. But we got David Carr. I said Carr already. We got Levi Haynes, Wyatt Henderson, Snyder, Woods, PJ Duke. PJ Duke is a high schooler. If a lot of you did not know that, PJ Duke is a high schooler. So it's like that's wild in itself. Um, that I don't know if that's the first time that that's happened, but we got a high schooler on the senior level world team. Like, tell me that doesn't excite you that the up and coming is pretty promising too. So that's something that looks even better. You have that going for it. So that's a whole separate thing going on that you got going on. You got Wyatt Kendrickson. You got Kyle Snyder, Spencer Lee, Real Woods, PJ Duke, Zahid Valencia, Levi Haynes, David Carr, and I don't want to butcher this one, so I'm gonna figure it out. Yep, and you got Trent Hill. Again, apologizing for the butchering, but you look at that squad. That's a good squad. To not for the first time to be no Dake, no Burrows. Obviously we know David Taylor's off to the coaching role. That is just absolutely like impeccable. And this is the first time we don't have those guys, and I think this is gonna be interesting. But again, this is Team USA we're talking about. USA Wrestling is we've been talking about lately on the pod legacies. USA Wrestling probably has the deepest legacy rooted when it comes to world and Olympic wrestling. I know there's some good teams up there. There's some good nations up there that also are in that good legacy. I think USA has it the most. I mean, on the women's side, just if we peek it real quick, we know a couple years running, Japan has had a good women's team, but we know that there are really good, like, you know, there are sports that when it comes to the world level, you talk about they're runaway, they're one nation versus another, or they're not one nation or another. We talk about wrestling at the world level. It doesn't matter where they're coming out of. There's a lot of good wrestlers that come out of some of those other countries. They have a lot of good wrestlers. You know, I think America has the best success model in terms of, hey, you when you start high school wrestling, it is folk style, and you're learning all this folk style. And when you get up to college, still folk style. Like NCAA's is wild, and we see crazy upsets at NCAA's. And for some of those that don't really watch NCAA's, just you can YouTube it or Google it, and you'll understand some of those. Just type in the biggest upsets, and sometimes there'll be a highlight video rolling with all those big upsets at that NCAA level. And let me tell you, even folk style is doing really good. And now we got Claw coming out, and it's about to get better. And then we got real I know what it is, and I'm gonna look it up because it's slipping my mind right now. A lot of good um a lot of good wrestling going on right now. A lot of really good wrestling going on between all these nations, and people don't understand it is a tough thing. It is like something that is absolutely immaculable, you know. And you could see like it's the impact of where some of these guys are, like the clubs are at. Like, you know, one day we got to do a video breaking down the best like post NCAA wrestling club. We gotta like there's so many. Like, I mean, you have the New York Regional Training Center, you've got Titan Mercury, you got Cliff Keen, which is the Mish. You, when I tell you there's just so many, there is literally so many clubs that just real American freestyle. Um, you know, and this real American freestyle, if many of you don't know about it, we'll kind of get into them. Um, it's Hulk Hogan backed. Like Hulk Hogan is backing this, and it's backed by Hulk Hogan, Izzy Styles, Israel Martinez. Um, he's founder of Izzy Style Wrestling. We got Eric Biscoff, like Hulk Hogan. Like, if that doesn't excite you, that like they went out and they started Claw, and then they started Real American now. Like, not by the same guys. Let me get that out there. This tells you that wrestling's gonna get some good leagues coming, and I don't want to say that Real American is going to succeed more than Claw, but I'm going to say that because we all know that Hulk Hogan's got some money. WWE superstar Hulk Hogan got some money. So you know that you're going to have a huge financial backing into this Hulk Hogan league where he's already got a lot of he's already, I feel like, stole more the bigger stars than Claw did. So Claw couldn't get let's run through some of the guys. So we got Wyatt Henderson. He's a Real American freestyle. So they've already got Wyatt. You got Willie Saylor over there. Real great, deep rooted wrestling guy in the community. That's amazing to have Willie Saylor, on there, involved in that, you've got legendary Kale Sonat, going to be one of the commentators over there. We've got some legends being lined up here. They got Real Woods over there. You got Parker Tech Tyson. We all know if you've seen some good Parker matches, that's going to be interesting. You got Will Luan over there. That's going to be good. You got Austin Gomez. You got Evan Wick. We're talking about the biggest stars of college wrestling. Those are some big stars of college. Wild matches of Will Luan and Evan Wick and Austin Gomez. We talk about this. Think about it. These are big guys that they're not going to be on Claw. They're not going to be on Claw. I mean, you're not going to be wrestling. So, you know, they came up and these guys are going to make money. So it's and then you got Ben Askren liking to be involved in it. So that's just it's just absolutely. Zahid Valencia is another one. Kennedy Blades, Ben Askren also signed possibly to compete. Aaron Brooks. If we stop real quick, thoughts and prayers to Ben Askren, Trent Hidley, David Carr, Kyle Dake. Come on, we got it. So now that we've taken the time to go over that, so I gave you guys the question: did David Taylor have an impact on Zahid Valencia beating Kyle Dake? And I gave you that. And now I'm gonna give you my answer after you now have thought about it, gone through Zepi and thought. Yes, yes, he did. You can't tell me that guy, David Taylor, being head coach of Cowboy, and Zahid Valencia being a Cowboy RTC, that they don't roll around. At least roll around. We're talking roll around. The impact, you can tell. He definitely had an impact on that. It, and I understand some may say, well, there's no way to know for sure. You roll around. You don't think it's a couple times to say, Coach Taylor, you roll around with me a little bit. Taylor brought a staff, and you understand he brought a lot of guys, and even on that RT side, they 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 got some of the UNI guys over there. They got some guys that a lot of coaches that have come from different places. That's a stacked room right now where there's a lot of guys that want to be able to help that because it's growing and it's gonna. A lot of them are saying you either get part of the change or you go. Now you got the Army guy over there, you know, Kevin Ward. Yes, Yeah, David Taylor had an impact. I think all the coaches over there had an impact on this. And as for Dake, are you going to start feeling that Burrows feeling where you're like getting beat left and right? No, but I think that's going to be the interesting story here is if Dake and Burrows have some of this similar feeling and they share their experiences. I'm not saying they got to be at the same wrestling club, but I mean, if you connect just a little bit and say, we're not done yet. We're going to get back on a team. That's going to be very interesting because look, and you know what? I'm even going to go a step further. Who's to say Jordan Burroughs spending all that time up at Cowboy RTC didn't have an impact over there? He was over there a couple times. He ran practice, so you got to say that the success model, like Jordan talked about, the success model for Stillwater right now is you're on a high note. You got guys that are doing really good. You got Wyatt Henderson that's just absolutely like he's on top. He's been on top for a while, and before he beat Gable this season, how many of you really was looking at Wyatt Henderson? I know that you heard his name when he was at Air Force a lot, when he was wrestling the national. Say, wow, good Wyatt. Didn't really break out, but when he came, you have to understand. I think it was Nick Sirianno that said this. If what's around you, it was something like if what's around you doesn't work out, you have to change what's around you. And I'm not saying for Wyatt Henderson, Air Force wasn't working out. Great place. But he had one more shot. And he says, I got to make the best of this. Because Air Force was not, they were not noticing fifth years. So I don't think you could spend a fifth year of it, something like that. This is where I go on to say, I believe that's what it is. So I believe, this is where I always go on to say, don't quote me on it. But I believe Air Force wasn't doing fifth years, and that's how he had to go somewhere else because they weren't doing it. And then you join that Taylor crew, where I think that was the best model for him. I think that was the best place for him to be. And when you talk about that, you say, okay, you talk about that's amazing. That he was able to do what he did. You have Gable come back, and a lot of people. I mean, even us on the pod, we kind of were like, Gable shouldn't be able to come back. Gable's done all this stuff, and now he's like, I'm gonna make this work. Like, oh, I'm gonna make this work now. And I almost felt like you needed to see Gable fall because you keep coming back. You make wrestling a back seat to your whole like all this other stuff you want to do. Even after you're bounced out of the WWE, you don't even go and say, you know what, let me go back to us. And then you try this NFL route, and I think who's doing it better is, if you don't know, Mason Paris is also was around some stuff in the NFL, was doing some stuff in the NFL. Like Gable thought he was just this guy that could do anything and just boom, boom, boom. Then after nothing works out, you then decide, let me do wrestling. Let me come back and now wrestle college again. And then, he was doing great, walking through, some guys and really, typical Gable look good, but to come to the Nationals and then get beat, it's like, hey, you weren't untouchable. And the greatest thing to that is we talked about this. You have to stand across your opponent and believe he can beat you. You have to believe that. And when you can believe that, now you have to think, okay, how's he going to do it? Then you're like, okay, he's going to shoot 4 or 5 high crotches. He's going to. Then now you start to understand. You start to understand what's coming. And that's, if somebody can beat you and you don't think you're untouchable, you don't go in there like, all right. Because I kind of felt like Gable felt like he was untouchable. I felt like that Gable kind of pounced around like, you come back to wrestling like, oh yeah, I'm going to get this title. But I love that, Wyatt went in there and did what Wyatt needed to do. And that was say, hey, I'm Wyatt Henderson, and that was a good, like, I think that was the good, like, hello, this is a David Taylor team and we're going to make some history here. And to come in first year coaching, and he's got a team trophy. You talk about something that that is just absolutely immaculable, like something that it's interesting. Like if that doesn't excite you more than that, then what does? Like that's what gets me. What does excite you if that doesn't? You know what I mean? Like what does? Because that's crazy. First year coaching. And I understand a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, he got all those transfers." Yeah, bro. Yo, bro, what up? No matter how you address it, just because the Wayne calls it the draft of wrestling. Just because David Taylor got smart enough to be able to land every recruit by being David Taylor and doing the right thing and being able to say, "Hey, I'm building something here." Everybody else had an equal chance. When you go in that transfer portal, anybody can pick somebody up. You chose not. You chose not to do it, and David Taylor quietly got what many would say is most of those guys that he got were already, most if not some, were already all Americans. Like Wyatt Henderson, some of them were already all Americans now. And you turn around and you say, okay, David Taylor quietly stacked up a team, and he's picking up people like kind of the same how the Nebraska Cornhuskers turned around and picked up AJ Ferrari. As soon as he hit the thing, they were like, waste no time. We want him. It, you go in there your first season and you get a trophy, and you can't tell me that's not something that's about to like rule college wrestling if he gets there. And then he's like stealing good recruits. Good recruits. You talk about a lot of good recruits that are going towards David Taylor. Like if you looked at the recruiting of this class, a lot of you have like some. I think some like flip commitment. Oh, we're going to. He definitely put a fork in the road when he took that coaching job. And all things aside, obviously everybody, along with me, thought the job was going to be Coleman Scott's. But I think I like what's going on there because even Jordan talked about the success model. Now you got Coleman Scott running a wrestling club. So, it you're kind of going to start building the next Cowboys. And even like, you're going to be building a lot of them. So like, even if, I know you have Cowboy, like Jordan Burroughs was saying, you have Cowboy RTC for the little ones. But you talk about if you don't make Cowboy RTC or however, you're not over there. Coleman Scott's running a wrestling club. Coleman Scott. Like if that doesn't tell you something, Coleman Scott, I'm sure was a part of. I think UNC has in history 17 ACC titles. You can't tell me Coleman Scott at least didn't get one of those. At least one. And what he's done at the Olympic level, he's. I consider Coleman Scott famous for the Tony Ramos. While he was head coach. Just go the 2-2 match. If anybody has not seen that, you got it. It's a great match to watch. Some good freestyle wrestling. So for those who have seen it, need a refresher. Tony Ramos scores. Coleman Scott gets. Coleman Scott. The whole problem was the 2-2s. So Coleman Scott had I believe Tony Ramos had the higher point score. So in criteria for freestyle, many of you might not know this. When it's tied, it goes to who scored last, but that's not true. So if I get push out 1-1-1-1-1, 4-1 push outs, that's great. I might have criteria, but in that match, Tony Ramos had 2-2s, 2 takedowns, which made him have the criteria because he had the two takedowns, the 2-2s. And the whole time, Tony Ramos is wrestling like he's got to score. Coleman Scott's walking away like, hey, in the end, he's like, hey, I've won this. And then in the end, when the match stops and he starts celebrating, they're all looking at each other and they're like, wait a minute, does he not know? And they then break it down. Ramos comes over and says, I got 2-2s. So is that? And yeah, it made the difference. That was also the same tournament, if many of you don't know, where Nashawn Garrett had that wild match. I believe it was Nashawn Garrett. Man, that was a wild tournament. If anybody saw that, that was and that was for to make Olympic team. Wild. I don't say that's the wildest in history, but it's got to be up there in the top 5 because that had some wild matches that tournament. But nonetheless, that was like the hey, 2-2s, Tony Ramos 2-2s. And that was like, hey, we got 2-2s, and that's what he kind of said. And he won the match on that. And Coleman Scott's like, wait, no, I had criteria. I scored last. Yeah, but Ramos had the 2-2s, and I love that match. But there's so much you can learn from that match in terms of the biggest thing you can learn. And I'll tell you without even having to watch the match. Score does not matter. And I'm gonna, and a lot of you may disagree with this. You're gonna, and I'm gonna break it down for you. Because when you look at the score, you can always read it wrong. And I did that when I was little. I read the score wrong. And when you keep a score on your attacks, you're getting takedown for takedown. And you're in the match. Don't be worried about the score. Unless you're inside that like third, I say first period, second, going into third, yeah, but my point here is not physically the score does not matter because yes, the score does. It's okay. Don't worry about checking your score till you get to that point when you have to. So, you always, no matter what, if it's Olympic level, you always got coaches in the corner. The coaches will let you know, hey, you're down. Or if you're in a Coleman Scott situation where everybody didn't really know that this is all sports in general. There's always going to be that groundbreaking moment when they figure out the rules here, when they finally say, well, no, you can't do that. And they say, yeah, yes, we can. So, Coleman Scott reads that wrong and doesn't think, well, Ramos has 2-2s. Does that give him criteria? Yeah, it does. It does. And you got to understand, you look at that score and think you're up. Don't look at that score and say, I'm up. I don't have to score anymore. No, you should still be scoring. You should still stay offensive. You should still, just because you're up by 1, no, put yourself up by 3, put yourself up by 4, put yourself up by 5. Don't look at the score and say, I'm up. Let me just. I get it if it's like if it's a Roman Bravo Young and Sammy Alvarez. If many of you don't know, you got to see that match. That's another match from Big Tens. If it's that situation where you got a scrambly Sammy Alvarez and you made that could go either way. Yeah, that's the only time I say, yeah, don't stay offensive. You're up by 1. Do what Roman Bravo Young did. And if you don't know what he did, watch that match because that was another good one. There are so many wrestling matches, even if they've already happened, you can learn from them. Even if you have to watch them twice and 3 or 4 times, you can learn from it. You can learn from it. You can learn from it, and that's just the biggest thing to the wrestling models. There's so much you can learn from. Well, with the episode drawing to an end, this is another weigh-in episode. I bring to you guys, continuing that streak, which I have been doing very comfortably, by the way. Just amazing. So with that being said, I would like to say this is the weigh-in. So like, comment, subscribe, share. This is the weigh-in by Benoit Chestnut and normally Sebastian Romero, but he will return at some point. And just another epi. It's good matches to look at, but nonetheless, this is the weigh-in. So weigh-in out.
The way in where stories ignite.